Okay, today's discussion is going to be Book 1 of the Nichomachean Ethics. This is probably the most important book of the ethics, so there's a lot of stuff in here, and it's jam-packed in right from the beginning. So I'm going to end up reading a fair bit of it and having things to say about each section. And when I'm back in class on Monday, we will probably talk about a lot of these themes some more. But as I've mentioned before, as we've been going through Aristotle, the Ethics is one of his most influential works. And still, when people consider themselves Aristotelian today, uh, many of them are coming at it from the ethical perspective. There's still some who take the sort of Aristotelian metaphysical view. The Thomists, for instance, would kind of take obviously a Thomistic interpretation of Aristotle. But the ethics is, and virtue ethics, which is the name for the theory that he puts forth, is extremely influential. So we're going to get started right off the bat with Book 1, very first paragraph of Book 1. So in this book, this version that you all have, that's on page 935. So I'm going to just read that first paragraph. It says, every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good. And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. But a certain difference is found among ends. Some are activities, others are products apart from the activities that produce them. Where there are ends apart from the actions, it is the nature of the products to be better than the activities. Now, as there are many actions, arts, and sciences, their ends are also many. The end of the medical art is health, that of shipbuilding, a vessel, that of strategy, victory, that of economics, wealth. But where such arts fall under a single capacity, as bridle making and other arts concerned with the equipment of a horse, or the equipment of horses fall under the art of riding, and this and every military action under strategy, in the same way other arts fall under yet others. In all of these, the ends of the master arts are to be preferred to all the subordinate ends. For it is for the sake of the former that the latter are pursued. It makes no difference whether the activities themselves are the ends of the actions or something else apart from the activities, as in the case of the sciences just mentioned. So a bunch there. So let me pause, talk about that for a minute. So the first point I want to stress, and I think we've talked about this before, and it was one of Aristotle's four causes, final cause. And as you'll remember, final cause explains things in terms of the ends, goals, and purposes that that thing is seeking to attain. So you're in this class in order to pass, to get a college degree, let's say. So in other words, your being here is a means to an end. So the end is the final cause of why you're here now, why you're doing what you're doing now. And so in this paragraph, he's saying that there are different ways of thinking about ends. So some of these ways are based upon activities. So sometimes the end is an activity. So reasoning and thinking and contemplation will be for Aristotle an end that is an activity, right? We don't think, in Aristotle's mind, we don't think or play music for the sake of some other end, but we do it for its own sake. But a lot of other activities have a product as a result. Shipbuilding has a vessel, home building has a home, flute making has a flute, etc. And so these activities then are a means to an end. So the way to think about this then, and the way to kind of sort through it, is to think about, okay, what is the goal here? What is being accomplished? What's the end that's being pursued? And the end is going to be more perfect than the means to that end, which explains the subordinate ends under higher ends. So the general who is in charge of the ultimate end of victory in battle uses the activity of strategy as a means to that end. But there's also bridle making and all the various subordinate activities under the general, which are means to the general's end. So we can be pursuing many ends at one and the same time. I mean, you all are probably pursuing many ends at one and the same time. You're pursuing your degree here at St. Ben's. You've got other ends and goals you're pursuing in life, and you may, after you've finished watching this, go get something to eat as another end or goal that you are pursuing. So that's perfectly normal. And so for Aristotle, then, the way to think about our lives then as human beings is to think about it in terms of the ends and goals we are pursuing and what we do in order to attain these goals. So one of the things that I do, and this kind of opens us up to the next theme that Aristotle brings up in here, is let's see, I want to make sure I'm covering everything. Yeah, is if I were to walk up to someone randomly and say, "What are you doing?" I say, "I'm here waiting for the bus." Say I ran into them at a bus stop. "Why are you waiting for the bus?" "So I can get on the bus, go to my friend's house." "Why do you want to go to your friend's house?" "Oh, we like to hang out." "Why do you like to hang out?" "Because it's fun to do." And then I could keep asking him these questions. And if they have enough patience with me to continue on to the very end, the final end will be some goal or activity that is not a means to something else. That, and I'll read a paragraph in a few minutes, is what he's going to call self-sufficient end. In other words, it's an end that has no other end beyond itself. Hence, it's self-sufficient. So we think of self-sufficiency, it's being, you don't need anything outside yourself to maintain yourself. And so the ultimate goal of life then is to maintain or realize one's perfection. And one's perfection is a kind of self-sufficiency. It may depend on other things to get there. So the chicken, if it's going to become the chicken, needs to eat, needs to not get killed, needs to have all sorts of things go right in order for it to achieve its perfection of being a chicken. And that will be, once it achieves a chicken, that's what it's set out to be. That's its perfection, its self-sufficiency, and so on. And so for Aristotle, then, the way to think about these things is in terms of these goals and ends. And the means to those ends becomes part of the question for Aristotle. Because, as I mentioned, the fact that if there's an egg, a chicken egg, doesn't mean that that egg will hatch and the chicken will come out of the egg. Something may happen, or once the chicken is hatched, doesn't mean the chicken will fully develop to become, the chick will become a full-fledged chicken. So there are things that go wrong along the way to realizing one's end or perfection. Well, that gets right to the point of the Nichomachean ethics in terms of looking at human actions. Humans also have a goal or end in our lives and a perfection that we seek to attain or to achieve, but it doesn't always go right. And so the point of this book, and that'll be much of what we talk about after I get back next week, will be what goes wrong and how can we fix it? How can we be aware what needs to go right and how might it go wrong and how can we go about making changes, etc. But the main point of the first book here is to set the stage for that discussion and to kind of get to the bottom of, well, what is the goal for human life? Okay. So the next paragraph I wanted to read, and this is related to what we had talked about before when we were talking about the metaphysics, how being is said in many different ways, that Aristotle was very attentive to the context and the circumstances under which we are talking about something. And so, as you can imagine, if we were all to sit around and talk about the good life, we might all have our own vision what the good life is. For me, it might be, being up in the mountains after a full day of skiing, sitting back with a glass of wine and reading some philosophy. That would be a good day. For some people, they may not drink, they may not like wine, they may not like skiing, they certainly might not like reading philosophy. So my vision of what the good life might be may be very different from someone else. Someone else might want to go out on a boat and go fishing. And for me, that'd be like Chinese water torture. I mean, I don't want to do that because I don't catch fish for some reason. And so that would be a very different view of what the good life would be. So Aristotle's recognizing that as he's branching into this topic of ethics and value judgments, that he's venturing into a ground that has a lot of variability, is the word that's used in our text. So let me read this passage and you'll see what I mean. So this is on the next page. This is the first paragraph of chapter 3, page 936 of our book, or paragraph 1094, so chapter 3. He says, our discussion will be adequate if it has as much clearness as the subject matter admits of, for precision is not to be sought for alike in all discussions, any more than in all the products of the crafts. Now fine and just actions, which political science investigates, admit of much variety and fluctuation of opinion, so that they may be thought to exist only by convention, and not by nature. And good signs and goods also give rise to similar fluctuation, because they bring harm to many people. For before now men have been undone by reason of their wealth, and others by reason of their courage. So one might think that, well, ask 10 different people what the good life is, or what's just and proper, you'll get 10 different answers. And then if you bring in cultural variation, you can definitely see. So Aristotle was a man of the world enough to know that, and Athens was a destination city for the Hellenic world and beyond the Hellenic world, that people would go to Athens. So in some ways we could say it was a cosmopolitan city in its day. So people would come with the stories of their culture and their values and the things that they prized and the things they thought were just and beautiful and good. And so Aristotle would have thought, wow, that's different from us. And remember what we've talked about with well, this was a different class, but Hume will have said in the intro class, if you're in the intro class, how we tend to dislike things that are from a different culture, that are very unfamiliar to us. And so Aristotle was aware of this unfamiliarity, but he was also aware that maybe that's not, just because there's this appearance of variability, doesn't mean that we are at a loss to talk about it. And he, as you will see, he has a proposal, an idea as to how we might think about ethics. All right, and so that's kind of the set the problem up, right? He set the problem up of, okay, we have this way of living that we're pursuing an end or goal. That goal, we wouldn't pursue it if we didn't think it was good, right? That's the other thing, is that we automatically pursue what we take to be good. We might be mistaken. Again, that's another one of the things that is at work here. And the ethics is that sometimes we might be mistaken about what's good for us and pursue it as if it were good, not fully realizing that it's not good. So that's going to be another theme that comes up. But the good is going to be that which we seek, that which motivates our actions, and yet we don't always get it right. So what is the good? What will be the right way to pursue it? It seems to be a bunch of variability on that point. So are we just at a loss? We just kind of to each their own? It's all just a matter of opinion? No. And that's where the important chapter 7 comes in. So I'm going to spend, I think, the rest of this talk just talking about chapter 7. And there's times when, in lectures, when we're in class, as you know, we get good discussion, where I spend more than a class just on this chapter, because it's jam-packed with the important kind of turning point and the kind of cornerstone argument for Aristotle's ethics. So let me turn to that and read the first paragraph of chapter 7 of book 1. It's on page 941 of our textbook. He says, let us return to the good we are seeking. So he'd kind of been talking about other things and different arts and different things that are good within those arts and so on. And ask what it can be, right? Because we still haven't gotten to the bottom. What is this good that we are seeking? It seems different in different actions and arts. It is different in medicine, in strategy, and in the other arts likewise. What then is the good of each? Surely that for whose sake everything else is done. In medicine, this is health. In strategy, victory. In architecture, a house. In any other sphere, something else. And in every action and pursuit, the end. For it is for the sake of this that all men do whatever else they do. Therefore, if there is an end for all that we do, this will be the good achievable by action. And if there are more than one, these will be the goods achievable by action. So he's kind of recapping, sort of after all these discussions and looking at all these different arts, that it seems like, yes, in these arts, people are doing actions and doing things. There's activity going on, but it's for the sake of something, some final cause. And that something is thought to be good. Right? So we have a value term here, good. And this good is that which motivates and is the reason for why we are doing what we are doing. Now, skipping the next paragraph, he then says, now, because after he's talked about the end we seek, that we don't seek for any other end, that we just seek for its own sake, he then begins the next paragraph saying, now such a thing, happiness, above all else, is held to be. For this we choose always for itself, and never for the sake of something else. But honor, pleasure, reason, and every virtue we choose indeed for themselves, for if nothing resulted from them, we should still choose each of them, but we choose them also for the sake of happiness, judging that by means of them we shall be happy. Happiness, on the other hand, no one chooses for the sake of these, nor in general for anything other than itself. So if I were to ask, why do you want to be happy? Most common answer I get, well, think what your answer would be. If I ask, why do you want to be happy? Most people would say, it's better than being sad. Now, that's not a reason for being happy. It's almost admitting, it is kind of admitting, that there is no reason for happiness. Happiness is its own reason, right? You know, by me, there is no reason. There's nothing outside happiness that is a reason for being happy. Happiness is its own reward, is its own self-sufficient satisfaction. You don't seek happiness for something else that it gets you. Okay, so that's a key point. So this is often thought of as a final end, or the self-sufficient end, or just simply happiness. And now Aristotle's point, and he's going to, this is kind of his assumption here, is that all of us, each human being, each rational person is going to, I've kind of given away one of the answers, but each rational person is ultimately going to seek happiness as their ultimate goal in life, as their final end. It's that for the sake of which we do everything else. Now, this does not mean that once we attain happiness, we're like, done. Happiness is going to be a kind of activity. It's a kind of way of doing things, as we will see. It's not one of those things that you've got it, you put it on your mantle like a diploma or something. It's a way of living. And so it's dependent upon continuing to live in the way that's in alignment with happiness. But if you're living in that way, you're living in a state of self-sufficiency and in a state of good that doesn't depend on anything else. Okay. So the next paragraph, then, he says, from the point of view of self-sufficiency, the same result seems to follow. For the final good is thought to be self-sufficient. Now, by self-sufficient, we do not mean that which is sufficient for a man by himself, for one who lives a solitary life, but also for parents, children, wife, and in general for his friends and fellow citizens, since man is born for citizenship. So, one of the things about Aristotle which differentiates him from a good segment of modern and contemporary philosophy is that he is I guess you could say a communitarian is one way of putting it. But the more traditional way that Aristotle would put it is that we are political, social animals. And our happiness, therefore, isn't something that we just seek and attain by and for ourselves alone without consideration of others. Our happiness is connected with the happiness of family, friends, loved ones, and our fellow citizens. So there is a connection between our happiness and the polity that we live in. And that's why Aristotle will follow up his discussion of ethics, what becomes this Nichomachean ethics, with his politics, because our true happiness is going to be dependent upon um, living in a good state, in a good polity as well. Now, there's a limit to that. He's going to go on and say that if we were made unhappy or miserable by any suffering that's going on in the world, we would always be miserable because, as we know, just turn on the news, you'll find that there's suffering going on somewhere all the time in the world. But so there's a kind of an important sort of nucleus of our social relations that affect our happiness. So our happiness is connected to the group of which we identify and of which we are part. That's where civic virtue comes in his political thinking and writing and so on. So just wanted to stress that point here because he goes on to say this. But some limit must be set to this. For if we extend our requirement to ancestors and descendants and friends, we're in for an infinite series. And we know what Aristotle says about an infinite series, that we can't have one of those. So there has to be a point where a friend's friend, something bad happened to them, that's bad for them, but it's not ultimately going to affect our happiness, our self-sufficiency. Let us examine this question, however, on another occasion. The self-sufficient we now define as that which, when isolated, makes life desirable and lacking in nothing. And such we think happiness to be. And further, we think it most desirable of all things, without being counted as one good thing among others. If it were, this is a key point, let me repeat this. We think it most desirable, happiness, most desirable of all things, without being counted as one good thing among others. If it were so counted, it would clearly be made more desirable by addition of even the least of goods, for that which is added becomes an excess of goods. And of goods, the greater is always more desirable. If one beer is good, then two is even better. Happiness, then, is something final and self-sufficient and is the end of action. So if I were to ask, according to Aristotle, if you claim that you're happy, in Aristotle's sense of the word, you're happy, but you would be happier if you had a jaguar, are you really happy? Aristotle would say no, because if you are truly in a state of happiness, you're in a state of want of nothing, and so you wouldn't need a jaguar to make you more happy. Happiness doesn't need anything. It is in that state of self-sufficiency. Now, this does not mean that you can't be happy and have a goal for yourself of being able to, I don't know, save up for a jaguar if that's what you want, but it's not going to make you more happy, right? If you're happy in the true Aristotelian sense of the word, there's nothing that can be added to it to make it more. It's sort of the ideal perfect state, right? That's why you can't add anything to perfection because it's perfect. So there's nothing more to be added to it or taken away from it. Okay, so we've gone a couple passes through at this notion of happiness and self-sufficiency as a sort of final end or goal of what we want to seek. So we know something more about what we want to seek, but there's still that variability that I talked about. I mean, well, what does that mean? I mean, someone else may still have a completely different sense of what they ought to pursue. And that's where this next paragraph, and I think this next paragraph is the one that kind of finally gets us to kind of answering this question. So he says, presumably, however, to say that happiness is the chief good seems a platitude, and a clearer account of what it is still desired. Right? Everyone would say that they want to be happy, but what is it? I mean, depending on who you ask, you might get different answers. This might perhaps be given if we could first ascertain the function of man. So this is a key move here, right? The function of man. What are we doing that? So remember, the point is that what we're talking about is an activity that sometimes the goal or end is an activity, sometimes the activity is a means to a product, something that the activity creates or produces. But an activity is a doing something. It's a functioning. It's an act of functioning, and something is to be identify it as the kind of thing that it is based on the function that's associated with it. So I think I gave this example in class once. If I were to bring some object in and you've never seen it before, you might ask, what is it? First answer would be a name, like a perambulator. You've never heard of a perambulator. And so the follow-up question will be, what's it do? So that's asking for the function. What does that do? What activity does it do? What function does it carry out? What end or purpose does that object do? If it has no end or purpose, maybe it's an art object, or maybe it's a big doorstop or something like that, even those are a form of end or purpose that one is kind of using to explain what that thing is. So understanding the type of thing that something is definitely helped by knowing what its function is. And that's not an accident. For Aristotle, the function is the essence of who we are being realized in the world, being actualized in the world through the functions that are associated with the nature of who we are. So he goes on and gives a few examples to, I think, clarify this point. So rereading the previous sentence I just read, this might perhaps be given if we could first ascertain the function of man. For just as for a flute player, a sculptor, or any artist, and in general, for all things that have a function or activity, the good and the well is thought to reside in the function, so would it seem to be for man, if he has a function. So, if I were to tell you that I'm a carpenter, woodworker, then there would be certain functions or activities that you would associate with a function or a carpenter that I can do. If I say I'm a pianist, there would be certain function or activities that are associated with being a pianist that you would expect me to be able to do. And if you put down a piano and I can't do a thing on it, you would say, I thought you said you were a pianist, because you'd be expecting me to be able to carry out the activities that a pianist can, the functions. So the question now is there a function that makes man, that makes human beings human? Because the other point here is that, yes, there's the function or activity that makes me a carpenter, that makes me a pianist, but if you carry out that function well, then you're considered to be good at that. You'd be a good pianist. A good carpenter is one that not only does the functions that a carpenter can do, but does them well. That's when we'd say they're a good carpenter. So now we get to what makes one a good human being. Well, what makes one a good human being would be if there's a function or activity that makes humans human, and they do that function well, then they would be a good human being. So now we're getting somewhere, right? We're narrowing down the focus to what is important for Aristotle in terms of thinking about being a good human being. What's going on if we're a good human being? So now that becomes the question then, is there a function that humans have that makes humans human? Okay, so I'll pick up then where he leaves off. He says, have the carpenter then and the tanner certain functions or activities, and has man none? Is he born without a function? Or as eye, hand, foot, and in general each of the parts evidently has a function, may one lay it down that man similarly has a function apart from all these? What can this be? Life seems to be common even to plants, but we are seeking what is peculiar to man. Let us exclude, therefore, the life of nutrition and growth. So as we saw in De Anima, he has various functions or souls in De Anima, and so the one here would be the nutritive function, the function that those that live and grow have to carry out, right? If you're a living being, there's certain functions that are associated with a living being, nutrition and growth. But that plants have that function. But he's looking for what's peculiar to man. So he's looking for the function that's unique to human beings. So rules out this nutritive function. Okay. Next, there would be a life of perception. But it also seems to be common even to the horse, the ox, and every animal. So we also can perceive the world and experience pleasure and pain, but that's not unique to human beings. That also is something that animals can do as well. So some animals, one of the things that those animals do by nature is to perceive and sense the world and experience pleasure and pain. We as human beings do that too, but that's not what makes us human. So there remains then, as he goes on, an active life of the element that has a rational principle. Of this, one part has such a principle in the sense of being obedient to one, the other in the sense of possessing one and exercising thought. And so, in other words, what is the function that makes us human? It's our rational function. That's what makes us human. And this rational function, as he points out, has two sides to it. There's the side that exercises reason. So it's the side that can think things through, sort of problem solve, think about means to ends, figuring out what's best, what's right. Uh, so being able to kind of understand by use of reason what one ought to do in this circumstance. But then there is obeying reason, right? Doing what our reason would have us do. And those aren't always in alignment, right? We might know that, well, I really shouldn't have another beer, but we go and have it anyways. So we can be aware of, and that's, we aren't always virtuous or good, right? So part of being virtuous or good is therefore going to be exercising reason well and obeying reason well. If we do both those things, carrying out the function that's the essence of who we are as human beings, then we are a good human being, just like the carpenter is a good carpenter. And that is going to be, according to Aristotle, living a life of virtue. You know, virtue, as we're going to see, and that's going to be what we will be talking about in the next class, virtue is going to be what we do and how we live when we are exercising our reason well. Right? We have yet to clarify what it means to exercise our reason well. That's going to be the topic that Aristotle brings up in the next chapters and becomes big theme going forward as we go through the Nichomachean ethics. But I think that's about it for today. I think that's covered much of what I wanted to cover. Probably covered more since I did with recording it like this because I was able to just go nonstop. But if you have any questions, I'm going to post or just add to the dialogue, the discussion that I put up on Canvas so that you can raise any questions and I'll post my answers when I get a chance to. But I hope you have a good day or having a good evening, and I'll see you all next week. Take care.